Hey guys, thank you for joining me for another module of the CompTIA A course. Now today's module is securing workstations and data. It is still somewhat related to security, maybe not completely like our previous module, which is for the most part just security. Now speaking of security, what is the topics for today's module? Here you can see there's the main topics at least. Implement security best practices, so there's a little bit of security there. Implement data protection policies, once again some more security there, and protect data during incident response. You can see it's still somewhat security related. That is once again not the only topics in this course, that's simply the broad spectrum, the main topics. If you'd like to have a more accurate idea of what you can expect in this course, you can go check the video description down below. The video timestamps, the titles of those timestamps should give you a better idea. It's not all the topics, but it's a much better idea. It's better than nothing. Plus, you can go and use those timestamps for your convenience if you're looking for something specific. Speaking of convenience, do me a favor and give the video a like. It does boost my video and it does boost the channel. And what you can also do to do me a solid is to drop a comment down below and just let me know what you think of this video. If there's anything I should improve on, anything you'd like to see, or just a hello, all of that actually helps me. And if you're new to the channel and if you feel like it, you're welcome to also subscribe. That's always a win as well in my book. And since we've got all that mumbo jumbo out of the way, let's go check it out.
Alright guys, on to our first topic for today, being authentication. Now this is actually something we have somewhat covered in previous modules, and we did previously mention that the concept of authentication is when you go and prove you are indeed the owner to a certain account or to a certain device. So the fact that you know the email address or the username combined to the password for that device or that account, or the fact that your fingerprint unlocks that device or that account, or that your smart card or bank card or whatever you have physically on your person unlocks that account or that device, that is generally proof that you are indeed the owner to said device. Now, authentication comes in three categories. The first of which is something you know. That is probably the most well-known one, or the most widely used one in my opinion. Something you know would probably be something like a password, obviously, something like a PIN, possibly maybe even a password phrase for all we know. So that is a category that's free. The second is something you have. This is something you have physically on your person. It could be a bank card, smart card, a fob, heck, it could even be your cell phone. Now, cell phones is actually very widely used as something you have. That's probably the most common one besides bank cards and smart cards. And this is generally because of some platform sending you an OTP, a one-time PIN. Or nowadays, it might be some sort of acknowledgement you have to do on some sort of app. So if you're going to do some sort of banking, you might have to go and use your bank's banking app and acknowledge that payment before you can actually go ahead and pay someone. Microsoft also has a Microsoft Authenticator app you can go and use instead of OTPs these days. So if you're a Microsoft fan, so yeah, it is something you have because that PIN you receive is going to go to something that only you have, the phone. That acknowledgement you have to go and do is on your app, which is on your phone, which is something only you have access to. Now, the third one, which is in my honest opinion the least popular, but is becoming very popular very quickly, is something you are. Something you are is generally something biometric. Now, the word biometric means it's something you physically as a person. So this could be your fingerprints, could be facial recognition, voice recognition. You get all kinds of things that falls into this category. So these are the three main categories you get when it comes to authentication. Now, since we've got those three categories in mind, keep that in the back of your mind because our next topic here is multi-factor authentication. So we know what authentication is. Obviously, that's just prove that you are indeed the owner to the account or the device. But multi-factor is when you have to provide more than one form of proof at the same time to gain access to that account or that device. And for it to classify as multi-factor, never mind having to provide more than one, this more than one that you need to provide has to fall into more than one category. Two or more different categories to be more precise. So if I, for example, require a PIN and a password from you, that's both authentication, but it's not multi-factor authentication because a PIN and a password is both something you know, which both fall into the same category, as you guys would remember earlier. It has to fall into two different categories or more for it to classify as multi-factor, and depending on whether it's two categories or three categories will determine whether it's two-factor or three-factor authentication. So if I ask you guys for a PIN and at the same time I ask you for a bank card, that is an example of multi-factor. So when you go to your local ATM, your bank's ATM, to go and withdraw money, that is multi-factor in most cases because it generally involves you providing something that only you have, which is a bank card in most cases. It asks you for something only you know, which is a PIN in most cases. Two different categories. Now, I suppose if they asked you for a fingerprinted ATM, which they don't do yet, that might also be multi-factor because that's a different category altogether. Now, three-factor authentication is exactly what we just said. It just simply means now it has to fall into three categories or more to qualify as a three-factor authentication. Now, if you've got three authentications but it only falls into two categories, it's still multi-factor because it's still two categories or more, but it's not necessarily three-factor authentication. It's still just two-factor authentication and it's just asking you for three different things. So it has to fall into three different categories to classify as three-factor authentication. Two different categories or more to qualify as two-factor authentication. So there may or may not be a question in the exam where they ask you which of the following is an example of multi-factor authentication. Now there's generally a choice between one of four possible answers, and one or two of those answers normally only has a single word answer like a PIN or a password or a smart card. Obviously right off the bat we can eliminate those because it's a single authentication. And then some of them might say something along the lines of PIN plus password. You might be tempted to go and choose some of those, but be careful because some of those fall into the same category. So if one of the answers, for example, says PIN plus password, it's two authentications, but it's two in the same category. Both PIN and password, like we said earlier, is in the same category. So be careful, watch out for those. Don't just go and choose any answer that's got more than one authentication. Make sure they fall into two different categories or more before you go choose an answer in the exam. Okay, now that we've got authentication out of the way, let's move to a different topic which is slightly different: software tokens. Now, when you go and log on to something, this could be anything. So I think the simplest example would be you are within your company on a company PC, could be a laptop or a desktop, and you connect to one of your servers internally in that company. Maybe it's an Active Directory server, file server, anything. Now, when you connect to that server, it might very well ask you for some sort of username or a password. And generally, when you go and provide your username or password, it issues you with a token. That's what happens. So the same thing happens when you go and grab your normal domain joint machine at the office and you sign in the morning when you get there. So if you get to the office, it's probably going to ask you for a username and a password. You provide that username and password. And as we've explained in previous modules in this course, it's going to authenticate to a central point of authentication. Once it checks out and confirms that you are indeed an employee or a member of that organization, it issues your PC with what we call a token, which I previously mentioned. You can think of it as a hall pass or kind of like a badge that says visitor or guest. It means they are aware of your presence on the network. Now, using that token, whenever you try and access that same server, any other server, or any other resource in the network, they're going to basically tell you, hold up, buddy. Let us first see your token, and if they see there is a token that you have, and if it's legit, then you can pass on through, you can access this resource, whatever it might be. If you don't have a token, that's suspicious, or if your token is expired, that's suspicious, and it's going to block you from getting access. Now, with regards to software tokens, you can see the main point here is about a replay attack. That is when some sort of villain, hacker, or perpetrator is going to try and get a hold of your token. Now, obviously, they don't have a username or a password, so they can't get it via the legit way. So they're probably going to try and get a hold of one via an illegitimate way. And this is done via many ways. One of the most popular ways is to do some sort of man-in-the-middle attack, packet sniffer, eavesdropping, that kind of deal like we've spoken about in the previous module of this course, being module 11. So what's going to happen here is somewhere in the middle, let's say they're using some sort of software like Wireshark, he or she's going to try and get a hold of sensitive information. and they might very well get a hold of your token while you're on the network. So while you connect to your network unsecurely, they might possibly get a hold of that token of yours, which is issued to your PC. They're not going to use it immediately in most cases. And as soon as you're done with whatever it is you're done with, and when you're done completing your task, he or she is going to go and use that token of yours immediately afterwards as if they are you. So to the servers and whatever you're connecting to, it's going to look as if you never disconnected, and they can go basically carry on as if they are you with that token. So if there's anything that goes wrong afterwards, let's say they hack something, steal something, change something, on the server side, it might actually very well look like it was you that did that. Kind of like a frame job. Even though it wasn't you, but it's going to look like your token. That token was issued to you on your account, on your PC, and yet suddenly things went missing or things got changed. So that's of utmost security concern. Now, the SSO that's mentioned there in bright yellow, that simply means single sign-on, which generally means you type in a username and password, you only do it once, and then for the rest of the day or for the rest of that session, you don't need to do it again. So if you go and type in your username and password on your computer in the morning when you get to the office, as soon as you've done that once, that's good enough. You get a token on your PC for the rest of the day, and that token allows you to access all servers and all resources in that company network for the rest of the day. That's an example of single sign-on. All right, and then our next topic on today's module is password protection policies. This actually reminds me of a lot of horror stories I've seen in my day, not actual horror movies, but IT-wise stories of where people have locked themselves out of service or their accounts for the funniest of reasons or for the funniest of ways. And if you guys have any fun stories like that, I would very much like to hear about them. So please drop your story down below in the comment down below, and I will gladly go and read through it, and hopefully it's something funny that will make my day. So if you guys are curious about some of the horror stories I've got to tell, let me know, and I'll do a separate video for that, or I'll just drop it in the comments down below for you guys as an extra. But there's been some pretty neat times where I've had users lock themselves out of places in the weirdest of ways for the weirdest of reasons. And even I myself, it doesn't matter how much experience you've got, we all make mistakes as IT people. I've got many stories I can tell as to how I locked myself out a few times out of places, and you would laugh when you hear about some of these stories. So with that said, password protection policies is there to not just protect you, but more specifically your end users or your clients. So just to protect your environment and just ultimately make it more secure. But you need to be careful. If you're going to go make something too secure, it's going to have a ripple effect. For every action, there's a reaction. If you're going to make your passwords expire too quickly, if you're going to make them too complex, and if you're going to make them expire too, let's say the minimum password complexity requirements is instead of 8 characters is like 12 characters, there's going to be a ripple effect. And something would probably be a matter of people are going to write down these passwords. So the last thing we want or you want is for your users to go and write passwords down on a sticky note and put it on the screen. And that's what's going to happen if you're going to make the password expire too quickly, if you're going to make your password complexity requirements too high. um, yeah, people are going to start writing down passwords, and at the end of the day, you would have achieved nothing. Now, our first point there is minimum password length. On a server, you have to have a password. There's no ifs or buts about it. If you have a normal Windows 10 machine which is not joined to domain, there's no requirement at all for you to even have any password. You could leave it blank. But as soon as you join that machine to a domain of some kind, there generally is a minimum password requirement. And it's normally 8 characters or more. So unless they went and changed it, you're going to have a password of 8 characters or more. That's the default normally. It has to be uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and symbols. That's the default. Without anyone configuring anything, that's the default. Now, as the administrator that might possibly have access to this, you have the ability to go and make that password length longer, which means you can go and increase it to perhaps 10 characters, 12 characters. So your employees or your clients or your users have to have a password that's 10 or 12 characters long at minimum. And that's going to be quite difficult for your employees to remember. So I would say maybe keep it on 8 characters. By default, these passwords expire after about 42 days. You might be tempted to make that more or less even. I would say 42 is about the sweet spot, maybe 30 days around there. But do not go less than 2 weeks or 3 weeks. In other words, about 14 days to 21 days. If you're going to go less than that, people are going to forget their passwords more often because they're going to expire too quickly and change too quickly. which is also going to result in your people writing down their passwords on a piece of paper or a sticky note. Obviously, this depends on company to company. No company is the same. Every company is unique, just like every person is unique. But if you're going to make passwords expire too quickly, generally as a norm, I've seen most people will start writing down passwords, and that's the last thing we want. The second point there is obviously complexity requirements. We know what that is. So by default, it's uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and symbols. So with that, I don't really see people changing that much. Maximum password age, password history. So by default, you cannot go and choose a password that is a password you've used previously before. You yourself as well as your users. So if they want to go and use a password they've used 2 or 3 passwords ago, they cannot go and do that. So they can go and choose a password that looks similar by default, but it's not allowed to be exactly the same as a previously used password. Whether it be your last password, 2 passwords ago, 3 passwords ago, not allowed to look dissimilar. There are policies you can actually go and put in place, and this I do not encourage you to go and do, which can prevent your users or your employees from using passwords that even look similar to passwords they've used before. There's a huge ripple effect for that one because most people cannot remember their passwords. Remember, they have to have 8 characters or more. No words and stuff is allowed, so it's going to be random characters. It's going to be uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and symbols. So it's already as complicated as it can get. And now what's going to happen is these people, it might take them 2 or 3 weeks to just eventually memorize that password. And then just as they memorize that password, it expires. So what the average person will go and do, and this is probably not the best idea for them to go and do this, is when their password expires, they will go and change it, but they'll just go and add one small difference. Maybe a number 1 at the back, a number 2 at the back, a number 3 at the back, or a different letter. There's some small subtle change, just enough to get the system to accept the new password. But in reality, it's pretty much 95-98% the same password. So there is policies you can actually go and put in place which prevent people from using passwords that look similar or too similar to passwords they've used in the past as well. So you could do that, but be careful of those because then there might be a reaction to that where people are going to start writing down the passwords again. So it comes down to what we said earlier. If you have a reaction, there's a reaction. So we have got a minimum password age. We know what that is. User cannot change passwords. You can go and do that, but that's not advisable because if a user cannot change their password, who are they going to contact? You or the IT team. So unless you've got a very good reason for it, I would not encourage you to go and block people from changing their own passwords because they're going to start bugging you more than they already are doing as you know it. And then lastly, password never expires. That's not something we normally go and choose for the average user. That's something we only go and choose for an admin account or for an account that's not actually being used by a human. This could be an Active Directory account that's used by a printer, a scanner, a synchronization purpose of some kind. So whenever the account is used by an admin, maybe it's like a main admin account password or a robot of some kind, remember they can't change their passwords. You don't want an admin account's password to expire. And a robot's account, you don't want that password to expire because then whatever service it's rendering, it's going to cease working. So if it's scanning, printing, or whatever that account, it's not going to work anymore if that password expires. Okay, and then let's talk about account restrictions. So the first of which is log on time restrictions. So what you can go and do with that, you can go and restrict when someone's allowed to go and use a machine. So you might say this person is only allowed to log on to their machine between 8 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. That's one example of log on time restriction. This is actually surprisingly very widely used by parents amongst their kids. So if you have a PC or two in your household and you don't want your kids to go and use that machine outside certain hours, you can go and restrict their log on times, preventing them from using the machine while they're supposed to be doing homework. So maybe they can only use that machine between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock, maybe only between 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock, something like that. You can actually go and choose how many hours they have per day as well, kind of like an internet cafe. So if you only want to give them 1 hour per day, you can do that, and you can go and choose whether you can use that 1 hour any time of day or only during certain times a day. So, but the main topic here obviously is log on time restriction, and that is actually something that's pretty cool to go and use in your company if you want to prevent your employees from logging onto machines outside working hours. Because why would they? They're not supposed to be in the office, so why would someone be logging onto a machine outside working hours? It's suspicious. It could mean that that machine has been compromised. That's why. Now, station restriction is when you go and restrict a certain user account to a certain machine. Now, as you guys probably know by now, by looking at the module this far, a user account on an Active Directory can be used on any domain joined machine by default. So if you've got a company of 1,000 domain joined machines, by default, that person with that domain account can go to any domain joined machine, type in their username, type in their password, and authentication would occur. But what you could go and do is you can go and say station restriction or put those policies in place, which ties that machine down to a certain account or a certain person. So there's only one or two, it's probably going to be one machine that each person can go and use. So even though they're all in the same domain and they're all using the same Active Directory, you have to use your station. So this is to prevent people from logging onto each other's machines and getting up to no good, framing one another for something that they didn't do perhaps. Concurrent logons. And by default, only one logon can occur for each account. So if I try and log on to the Active Directory with your account, it's going to kick you out. And if you log back on with that same credentials at the exact same time, it's going to kick me out again. Concurrent logons, that's what it comes down to. So this could be for a lot of things. Normally we like to go and use this on websites or servers, not necessarily restricted to one specific account. So if this is a server, we might go and put a concurrent logon restriction there where it says only 3 people are allowed to be logged on to that server at any given time. If a fourth one or a fifth one tries to log on, it's going to tell them no, threshold has been reached. And they're going to have to wait for one of the previous 3 guys to disconnect first or to just go and turn off the machine first. And then, and only then, can they go and log on to the service, which is in this case a server. This is very widely used by things in the cloud nowadays. Not so much for on-premises stuff, hardly ever for anything on-premises. But I see this happening a lot and I configure this a lot for things in the cloud. So if you've got some sort of service in the cloud, this could be a virtual machine even in the cloud, you can go and configure how many concurrent log-ons can be on that virtual machine. So they can only log on to that virtual machine server maybe certain times during the day. They can only have 3 people or 5 people logged on to that machine at a given time. And you might even go and choose how many times during a day can someone go and log on. That is not even mentioned in this list. So you can go and say someone's only allowed to go and log on to that machine 3 times during the day. So only 3 sessions at a time, but whether you're one of those 3 sessions or not, only 3 times in a day can you actually go and log on. So if one of your previous sessions got disconnected for whatever reason and you have to reconnect, you would already be on your second session. That's what they mean by that. You can also go and have accounts expire after a certain date. That is something pretty common we do with both on premises as well as in the cloud. Second last point, disabling an account. Not something we do often, but this is generally done for someone that's left the organization. So if someone has resigned, maybe that someone is on leave, maybe in the hospital, a rule of thumb is to generally go and disable that individual's account for many reasons, but the main one being security. So that account is going to temporarily be what we call a Smurf account. It's going to be there on the system. It's going to be inactive, but it's still going to be there on the system. So we disable that account because we want to effectively prevent someone from logging in with that account. Because if someone's going to log on as that user, we're not going to know because, well, it's not going to exactly kick someone out. It's not being used by anyone. So it's not going to kick someone out, which means we're not going to know about it necessarily unless we've got some very sophisticated advanced monitoring software like Operations Manager in our environment. So as a rule of thumb, we disable the account and as quickly as possible, if required, even delete the account. So for time being, if this person left the organization, we're going to go disable the account, back up anything that needs to be backed up, check the privileges and the settings and all that, and as quickly as possible, ideally, delete the account to get rid of it. And the last one is failed attempts lockout. This applies to just about anything. This applies to even online gaming or anything like that. So if you try and log on to something of someone, you can go and try about 2 or 3 times. Let's say it's a password. And after getting the password wrong 3 times in a row, what is it going to do? It's going to lock the account or lock the device. In some cases, it might not lock it completely. It might just have a timeout period where it locks it for about 15 minutes, 30 minutes or so before you can try again. And should you get it wrong again, the lockout period is just going to be longer and longer and longer the more you get it wrong. So it's your choice. Only you would know what's going to work best for your environment. You can either have the account locked completely after 3 failed attempts, or you can have it temporarily locked out for 15 or 30 minutes. This is just to prevent someone from trying to crack the password. So in case the person really did just forget their password, they might remember after the 4th or the 5th try. which is why we have it just timeout for a certain period, because then at least they won't bug the IT team. They just need to try and remember the password. But if you're going to have to completely lock the account, and it really was that person, you're going to have a lot of people harassing you, especially on Mondays, to try and reset their passwords. It's very irritating is what it is. Now, speaking of failed attempts and lockout, this reminds me of the next topic, which is desktop lock and timeout. Now, a very big issue in any medium to large size organization is employees using each other's desktops, and this is normally without the consent of the actual owner of said desktop. So most commonly this happens during lunchtime. It's not obviously just in lunchtime. Maybe you're gonna go to the kitchen to go get yourself a quick snack, a coffee or a sandwich perhaps. Maybe you need to quickly go to the restroom. And if and when you leave your station unattended, if you didn't lock your station, this is of concern. Because fellow employees, and you get weird people out there, are going to go and sit down by your station, and they're going to get up to no good. Not necessarily anything good. It's going to be something not good, it's most likely. And it could very well end up looking like you did something which you did not do. This could even be a crime they're going to go and commit. They're going to go and commit some sort of crime, basically framing you, for lack of a better description. And when the investigation starts occurring, they're going to notice it looks like it was you, even though you were nowhere near your station at that point in time. You could have been in the kitchen for all they know. But that's not what it's going to look like in the logs. On the logs, it's going to show it was your station and your account. So with all of this in mind, it is very important for anyone to always lock their station when leaving it unattended. Now, what most IT people, including myself, do, and this needs to become muscle memory, you need to do this without even noticing you're doing it, is to press the Windows key and the L key when leaving your station. So the Windows key, for those of you that's not familiar with this, is the one that looks like a little Microsoft flag icon. It's normally between your Control and Alt key. Some keyboards have two, some keyboards only have the one on the left. So it's only somewhere between your Control and Alt key at the bottom left. It looks like a little Microsoft little flag. That is the Windows key. So if you hold that key down with the L key, it automatically locks your computer. Takes it to the logon screen where you would normally type in your password. But this does not mean it closes anything you had open on that machine, in case anyone's wondering. So any programs, any documents that was currently open on that machine is still open. It's just the machine is now locked. And when you come back from that coffee or come back from the restroom, you simply just go and re-enter your password, and it's going to resume exactly where you left off. That is a very good habit to have. Now, whenever I just stand up to go and help a client of mine, I automatically lock my keyboard without even noticing I do it. That's where you guys need to get to. You need to do this as muscle memory. You need to automatically lock your PC without even noticing you're locking your PC. That's the best muscle memory action you can go and have, is to automatically lock your PC. Now, it goes without saying anything can be hacked. I mean, obviously, if you go and lock your PC, it's not going to completely stop me if I have some level of IT knowledge. And that's not what we're trying to achieve here. End of the day, all you want to achieve here is you just don't want to give this to them on a silver platter. You want to make it as inconvenient for them as possible, and you're trying to discourage the behavior. So you're never going to stop any hacker or any action. That's not our goal here. Our goal is to discourage that behavior and not to give it to them on a silver platter. So maybe to go and break into your PC, it's going to take them 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And for you to go make a coffee, it's going to take you a mere 2 minutes. So they simply won't have enough time to break into your PC. And that's fine. That's all you wanted to achieve. So when you go for that coffee next time, just press the Windows key and L. When you get back, simply just type in your password. Alternatively, what you guys can also go make use of is set screensaver to require a password on resume. Now, assuming you actually have a screensaver, because Windows 10, most people don't actually have a screensaver, this is more something you'd find on the older operating systems. But if you happen to have a screensaver of some kind, you can actually have it require a password on resume. So if your PC is inactive for, let's say, 10 seconds or 30 seconds or 60 seconds, it can automatically go to screensaver, which is not something we do at all anymore on Windows 10. And as soon as you start moving the mouse again and it wants to resume, it's not going to resume exactly. It's going to ask you for a password instead. Now, something else you guys can go and make use of to help prevent people from getting up to shenanigans, in a manner of speaking, is also permissions and ACLs, better known as access control lists. Now, access control list is not something you will find on a specific platform. I, for example, myself have found this on switches, in some cases on routers or routers. I found this on servers. So where you find them is not really that important right now. What's important here is what they do. So an access control list allows or blocks people based on where they're coming from and where they're going to. So if this is configured on a switch, which is pretty much connected to everything on your network, if I'm on one part of your network, digitally speaking, I obviously have a MAC address and an IP address on my machine. And when I try to connect to someone or something on the network, that access control list is first going to go and check who I am and where I'm trying to go to. And depending on who I am or where I'm trying to go to, it can either block me or allow me based on my IP address or my MAC address. So that's basically what that does in a nutshell. It is a very effective means to go and block or allow people. Still not 100% effective. Like I said just a few moments ago, nothing is foolproof. All we want to achieve is to just discourage bad behavior and make it so darn gosh inconvenient that we're going to discourage the behavior in the day. So at the end of the day, if I really want to, I can go and spoof my IP address or spoof my MAC address, and I can still get right past your access control list. So there's many ways to go about it, but this is still very difficult, and it's not something that everybody knows how to go and do. And that's fine because we're still going to end up blocking most people. Something else that's pretty popular and very, very widely used is permissions. Either NTFS permissions or sharing permissions. In most cases, it's going to be a combination of both. Now, something we get with the NTFS file system, because you get FAT32 or FAT16, FAT32, NTFS, and REFS, but something you get specifically of the NTFS file structure is NTFS permissions, which in a nutshell allows me to go and allow or block people from going into certain folders or certain destinations based on their privilege, based on their account, based on their group. Sharing permissions is the same thing, except this only applies to sharing. So if I have shared something on my PC or on my network or on my server, you will either have access to it or you will not, depending on which account you're using, depending on what network you're on, depending on what group you're on. You'll either have access or you'll be denied from it. All right, and then speaking of being denied from things, another benefit we get specifically of the NTFS file system is something called the EFS file encryption system. So EFS is something that's only available from NTFS going onwards. So if you were to go and use a file system like FAT32, one of the older file systems, you will not have this benefit. You have to have NTFS or newer. Now EFS is an encryption, obviously the name says it all, and this is to allow you to go and encrypt a specific file or a specific folder on your computer, and only the owner to that file or that folder, the account that basically encrypted it, will have access to it. So not very widely used nowadays, if I'm being honest, because generally it's just one person using each machine. So if you are the only person using that laptop or that desktop, we generally just go and encrypt the whole hard drive with something called BitLocker. And that's going to be our next topic in just a moment. So the only times I've seen where EFFs is really useful is if you are having a PC that's being shared by amongst more than one person. So maybe it's a workstation at the office, and maybe this workstation is being used 24/7. And people are taking shifts. There's like two, maybe three or four people using this station in shifts. And if you have certain files or documents on that station that you do not want the other people to see or to have access to, that same machine that you guys share, then you might want to use your account to go and encrypt that file or that folder. Let's say it's a folder, like you would see in the picture on the top right hand side or bottom right hand side. And if someone else logs into that machine in their shift on their account and they try and access to your folder, they're not going to be able to gain access to it. So that's ideally what it does, but it's not really widely used. I mean, like I said, most people have their own machines nowadays. It's one person per machine. So it's not really that widely used. It's not a bad function. It's just there's no real need for it. Instead, now we want to prevent people altogether from accessing my machine at all. And one way to go and do that is to go and use another form of encryption called BitLocker. So this is full disk encryption. BitLocker is something that comes with Windows. But for you to be able to have BitLocker, not only should you have Windows, you should have the right version of Windows. So if we're talking Windows 10, you have to have Windows 10 Enterprise or Professional. Anything lower than that in the Windows 10, hierarchy is not going to support BitLocker. They don't have that functionality, which makes sense because the cheaper operating systems in Windows 10 is probably going to be used for home use, And from the home use perspective, why would you want to go and encrypt something? That's just weird. Now, I suppose there are exceptions. Obviously, some people really do work from home, such as myself. And some of the stuff on my computers really is sensitive in nature, because of the line of my work. I work with IT and security and stuff. So obviously, because of my line of work, I might need to go and encrypt this. So I might need to have professional enterprise installed on my home machines. But unless I need to go and do that, you don't need to go and get yourself the most expensive operating system on the market. You can just go buy yourself one of the cheaper ones, and they're going to still be able to allow you to do your day-to-day work, Word, Excel, still allow you to play games just like you would normally go and play games. You do not necessarily always need the best and the latest and the most expensive. It depends on your needs. Now, in my case of me being in IT full time, during my actual working hours and after hours, I absolutely need enterprise or professional because I run virtual machines, which means I need Hyper-V. Hyper-V is only supported on professional and enterprise of Windows 10. I need encryption, only supported on professional enterprise as well. There's quite a few things I need that's only on enterprise and professional. So in my case, yes, I need the high-end versions. But unless you're sitting in a situation like me, you don't need to get the most expensive. Now, getting back to BitLocker, that is an encryption that's going to encrypt a whole drive, not just a file or a folder. A whole hard drive is being encrypted. This could be internal or external. You can even go and encrypt flash drives. If you're going to go and encrypt a hard drive that's internal, any sort of storage device that's internal, in other words, it's actually inside your laptop or inside your desktop, for that we normally just use normal BitLocker. Any removable drive, like an external drive, a memory stick slash flash drive slash whatever you want to go and call it, that we're still going to be using BitLocker for, but instead it's not called BitLocker, it's called BitLocker to go. I find it unlikely they're going to ask you guys that in the exam, but I'm mentioning it just in case, you never know. So for anything internal, BitLocker. Anything removable, BitLocker to go. You can think of this as a fast food restaurant. In some fast food restaurants, if you're going to go and place your order, they normally ask you, are you going to sit inside the establishment or are you going to take it and go? Do you want it to go is what they will ask you. To go is when they give it to you in a little bag, normally like a brown paper bag in most countries. You take your order and you go. So flash drive and external drive is to go. You're going to take that stuff and you're going to go. So that's BitLocker to go. Now, in the old days, originally when BitLocker just came out, you needed to meet certain criteria first before you could use this. And this might be a question in the exam. So you needed to have an actual TPM chip on the motherboard. It stands for Trusted Platform Module, TPM. It's an actual chip on the motherboard that does the encryption for you. And you also needed to have a smart card and a smart card reader that can actually read the smart card. Now, all three of these things I've just mentioned were very expensive. You basically had to go and sell your kidney on eBay to be able to afford them. So only companies couldn't run this, and even most companies couldn't run this because of how darn gosh expensive it was. So you can imagine the Microsoft team sitting around the round table and saying, okay, boys, what can we come up with to allow our people, our clients, our customers to be able to use this great tool of ours, but not have it cost them an arm and a leg or a kidney, like I just said. So with regards to the TPM chip, they allowed you to go and use BitLocker now without a TPM chip, and they added a group policy function. So now within your group policies, there's a policy you can go and turn on. It's called allow additional authentication at startup. And I mean, if you think about it, normally if you go and type in your Windows password, that's authentication. But now, if you go and turn on this group policy, you're first going to see a black screen in most cases. It's going to ask you for another password before you even get to that normal Windows password of yours. And that password is your BitLocker password. And if you don't type that password incorrectly, that PC will not start because that hard drive is not going to unencrypt itself, that's good. Because if your PC gets stolen or your hard drive gets stolen, I mean, yeah, sure, you're going to lose the laptop or the desktop or the hard drive, but the contents on your computer will remain encrypted. It's completely useless to them without that password of yours, which only you know. Now, with regards to the smart card and the smart card reader represents something you would have physically on your person. So this is actually an example of multi-factor authentication if you think about it. The password would probably be something you know, and the smart card and smart card reader is something you have. The reader is just something I need to read the damn card, unfortunately. So the smart card, also very expensive. So what can we come up with to go and allow people to use something they have on their person and not cost them an arm and a leg and having to go and buy these smart cards and smart card readers. So what they came up with, and I don't know who came up with this, is memory sticks. At that point in time, they realized that, you know what? Everybody's got a memory stick or a flash drive. Why not use that instead? And that's exactly what they did. So you could go and use an actual smart card if you happen to have one, but it's not needed. You can go and chuck this flash drive into your computer, use that as your flash drive. So what's now going to happen is it's going to act like a key in your car. Your car doesn't start unless you've got the key in the ignition. So if that PC, if you use the smart card method, your computer will not start unless you've got the memory stick, which is now your smart card, in a USB port. So that memory stick has to be in a USB port when you start a computer. And besides the memory stick having to be in a USB port, you normally need to provide a password as well. You get to choose if you want both or just one or the other, but generally people will go and choose both. If that memory stick is not in USB port while you start the PC, it will not unencrypt. So you need the memory stick and you need the password if you chose both, which is multi-factor. That's the best way to go about it. So now, just because they've got group policies regarding the TPM chip, that does not mean you cannot go and use the TPM chip. Nowadays, a lot more motherboards come out of them by default. I actually want to go as far as to say that more than a half of motherboards come out of them by default. And I think now, moving into 2022, we're about to move into the year 2022, most computers probably would come out of them by default. Why am I saying this? Well, we're moving into an age where security is absolutely required, and also because of Windows 11. One of the requirements for Windows 11 is you need to have a TPM chip, 2.0 to be precise. So that just shows us that Microsoft is taking security a lot more seriously than it did in the past. And obviously with good reason, because everybody is tech savvy nowadays. So it's not like we can be as lenient as we used to be. So this is pretty much what BitLocker is, guys. Alright, so let's take a bit of a look at something else, still security related for the most part. Incident response policies. Now, as we've said in previous modules, an incident is when something happens, IT wise. This could be a medical emergency, a fire emergency, theft, theft would happen physically or digitally, something that broke, physically or digitally. So all of these are regarded as incidents. And what do we do in such incidents? So the first main category here is security incidents might include, but it's not limited to, computer or network infected with a virus, worms, trojans, just to name a few. Obviously, you get much more. I mean, you get spywares, ransomwares, adwares, and the list just goes on. So what do we do? What is the policy for when we find something like that? Now, some companies, the policy would probably be to go and isolate that PC. We unplug it from the network or disconnect it from the network. You don't have to necessarily turn it off, but generally it has to be unplugged from the cable or disconnected from the hotspot, just to prevent it from possibly spreading on the network. We don't want that. And then we'll go and investigate what went wrong. How did this PC get infected? A second possible incident could be an evil twin Wi-Fi access point. So that is when someone goes and takes an access point or a router, and the SSID, they will go and label the exactly the same as your company's. So for those of you that would remember from the networking modules, SSID is the name of your hotspot. So if my hotspot is the name of my company followed by underscore and then just guest network or something like that, they would go and take another access point or a router and they would go label their SSID as exactly the same. That is an evil twin, and it's to trick people into connecting to the wrong access point. And if and when you do that, they could potentially grab information from your device. And that information could be the actual passwords and stuff from your actual network. And that could allow them to go and do some form of replay attack or something, which is bad. A denial of service attack is also a potential, security hazard. So they can deny you any kind of service. We've talked about that previously in the previous module, module 12. Many kinds of denial of service attacks you get. Unlicensed software, this could be intentional, it could be unintentional. So maybe someone cracked something on a network. That's bad because you could fined for that. I wouldn't say you're necessarily going to go to prison, but you could get massive fines for that, especially as a company. Companies especially on the spotlight. A personal user at a home PC, yeah, you can kind of get away with it. But if you're going to go and do this at a company, companies are in the spotlight. And if you've got unlicensed software, that's drawing a lot of attention to yourself. And the chances are they will come and fine you for that. So it's of utmost importance not to have any unlicensed software on any company assets because they will fine you for that. Watch out, do not do that. So that's a no-no. Also, finding prohibited material on PCs. This could be anything. It could be illegal software, cracking software, pornographic material, You name it, the point is it's something that's no and it's against the company policy. It could even be something just full out illegal for all we know. Now, security incident handling lifecycle preparation is key. In other words, this comes back to what we said in earlier modules. Be proactive, don't be reactive. So it's best to go and plan for something before it even happens. Detection and analysis. So how are you going to detect whatever it is you want to go and detect? That includes those things we've mentioned at the top. It's not just limited to those, but let's say it's just those ones at the top. How are you going to detect if you've got, worms and viruses and trojans? How are you going to detect an evil twin, a denial of service attack, and unlicensed software? How do you detect that? There's many ways to go about that. Still getting to that, but one good way would probably be to go and use proper monitoring software, something like Operations Manager. It's part of the SCCM suite, for those of you who don't know. And then we have containment, eradication, and recovery. So if you find something, how do you contain it? In other words, isolate it. How do you get rid of it, and how do you eventually recover from that? So this is going to come down to having your high availability, redundancy, and full high availability and all that stuff in place. And then post-incident recovery is just a matter of what do you do once everything is over? What happens afterwards? Well, I suppose you just go back on with your day. All right, and then speaking of incident response, so we talked about incident response policies. Now we're going to be looking at incident response documentation. As I've said, preparation is key. It's better to be proactive than to be reactive. So make sure you've got everything properly documented, the policies as to what needs to happen when something is detected, documented policies and procedures for dealing with security breaches. So you need to go and train your staff. This obviously is mainly going to be your IT staff, but it's not just limited to your IT staff. So for the average end user or client, tell them, sir, ma'am, when you find an email that's suspicious, something, an email you were not expecting, an attachment or a link you were not expecting. Now, obviously, we are going to block these from coming through, but it doesn't mean we're going to 100% be effective at it. So, if and when you find something suspicious, please report it to IT immediately. So, this is a matter of training your users. So, that's just an example, guys. It's not just limited to what I just said. We have personnel and resources to implement the policies. So, who's going to implement these policies and how are you going to go about doing so? Clear lines of communication. So IT guys generally know what to go and do for the most part, but what about anyone that's not tech savvy? How do they go about reporting some form of incident, whether it be a security risk like a virus, a Trojan, a denial of service attack, or it being something like a medical emergency, a fire emergency? For quite a lot of these emergencies, you would find they would have like these placards, posters, or whatever against the walls, which have got the people, names there of who needs to be contacted, and their contact details like a cell phone number, an email address, maybe if this is after hours. So who can we go and contact? Preferably, there needs to be a backup person as well. So in case the main person is not reachable, who's the backup person? Imagine this is a fire or a medical emergency, and there's only like one person listed there, and I can't get a hold of that person. That is not a situation you want to be in. So we need to have like a second line or even a third line of defense there. Who are these backup people? Contact information and alternative communication channels, like I just said. Review and update periodically or after a trigger event. So whenever something happens, it doesn't matter what kind of event this is, go and review all those things of yours. Just check if they're fully up to date, all the numbers still up to date, email addresses, the people that's listed there are they still working for your company? Because obviously every few months or so in large companies, new people get hired, some old ones leave. Nobody stays at the same company forever. So that includes, you can see their staff changes, deployment of new network or security systems, so that could possibly not be included in your policies, changes in legal or regulatory requirements, so maybe in your state, your province, your country, or just in general in your organization, there was some sort of legal or regulatory requirements that's changed, which means your policies might need to be adjusted now. Okay, and then speaking of policies, data and device preservation. So what we're going to be looking at here is, for the lack of a better description, I suppose you can think of this as a crime scene. So if you ever stumble across, as if we're going to just stumble across this, but if you ever stumble across a crime scene of some kind, a digital one of some kind, there's a certain procedure you, your colleagues, and your organization needs to follow. This digital crime scene I'm talking about could be an actual digital crime scene, which means something happened digitally, on the servers, the computers. where you're going to have to go and investigate the logs and the computers itself. Or it could be a digital crime in the sense of a physical crime. Someone physically stole something. They stole laptops, desktops, computer screens. They physically stole servers or cameras. They physically stole physical assets. So that's also, I suppose, an IT crime. It's digital, but it's not. The other one is completely digital, where someone did something digitally. They stole data, stole information of some kind. So potato, potato, either way, there's a certain procedure that needs to be followed here. The first is document the crime scene. If it's a physical crime scene, something you can physically see and physically touch with your hands, document the crime scene, on a computer or on a notepad of some kind. What you see, what you saw, what you found, where you found it, in what state you found it, when you found it, how, where, all that. Document absolutely everything, even if it doesn't seem important. Remember, we are IT experts, and the people that can investigate this, they would see something that we obviously otherwise would not. They know what to look for. Just like you guys know what to look for IT wise, these investigators will know what to look for. So it's important to go and make notes of anything, even if it's something small. If this is a digital crime, exactly the same thing. Whatever you found, also when someone stumbled across this digital crime, when did you find it? How did you find it? What did you notice? When first did you notice it? Everything you saw, documented. Now, second point is interview witnesses. So if there's physical witnesses or witnesses saw this digitally, interview them, get their statements, gather evidence from the live system. So if there's a physical crime scene, gather evidence. It might not necessarily be you, it might be the actual authorities. If it's a digital system, it might partially be you, or it might be some digital investigators that's going to have to gather this evidence. Use forensic tools. I can't tell you exactly what that's going to be because it depends whether this is a physical crime or a digital crime. Physical crime is going to be physical forensic tools, like the kind you would see in a good old action movie. If it's digital crime, it's going to probably be some sort of digital forensic tools. Make cryptographic hash of collected data. Shut down or power off any systems. That's just to prevent people from tampering of the evidence if it's a digital crime. Place evidence, this is now if it's physical evidence, place evidence in a tamper-proof bag. That's very important. So it's kind of like what you guys would see in some sort of CSI, NCIS, whatever movie or series. Put it in a tamper-proof bag, kind of like the ones that the police would use. It's pretty much exactly those. And it's very important for the chain of custody to be followed, which means it needs to be a tamper-proof bag so that people's fingerprints that doesn't belong on evidence doesn't get on there accidentally. Otherwise, it cannot be used in a court of law in most countries. And this evidence needs to follow this proper procedure. It's not allowed to touch the hands of people it's not supposed to touch. It needs to get to the destination via a proper means. So only certain people are allowed to handle the evidence, and only they are allowed to get it to its destination. Only they are allowed maybe to carry this evidence. These are all things you need to keep in mind. So chain of custody, document attached to evidence from a crime scene detailing when, where, and how it was collected, where it has been stored, and who handled it. So if any point in time it was collected in the wrong manner, was transported in the wrong manner, or stored in the wrong manner, the chain of custody would be broken. And if the chain of custody is broken, the evidence is not usable in a court of law. Even if we know 100% that person is guilty, it might be obvious, everybody might know the person is guilty, but if the chain of custody has been broken, the evidence cannot be used in a court of law. So it's absolutely crucial that you store the evidence, transport evidence, and collect the evidence in a proper means. So the first there is evidence must conform to valid timeline. Digital information must be tightly controlled against tampering. So that's why they got encrypted and use the hashing and all that. Each step should be documented and recorded, and so on and so forth. So you guys can see pretty much what the chain of custody is. I don't think you guys need to necessarily be in IT to know what the chain of custody is. Anyone that watches a good TV series or a good action movie would have an idea what chain of custody is. This simply just now applies to our IT environment. Alright guys, so that is pretty much it for today's module. As you guys can see, today's module was all about security again, just from a different aspect. It's not as long as some of the previous modules in Core 1. Core 2's modules are generally a lot shorter. And the upcoming modules that's remaining, I think we've got about 5 modules left for this course, are just going to get shorter and shorter and shorter. So generally the full course would normally be done by 5 days. And the first 3 days of the 5-day course will be Core 1. And only the last 2 days will be Core 2. So that in mind, you can see core 2 is lighter, there's less work to be covered, so our modules are going to be generally shorter. So it should all be downhill from now is what I'm saying. If you guys are still watching this episode at this point in time, just go drop a comment down below, say hell yeah, then at least we know you watched it all the way to the end, because only people that watched it to the end would know what the hell yeah is for. If you don't type the hell yeah in the comments, then we know you didn't watch the actual full video. So that's for the people that actually watch the whole episode all the way to the bottom, all the way to the end. So guys, like usual, give the video a like. It does boost this video and this channel, as you guys probably know by now, I'm sure. And if you're new to this series and you would like to know when the next module comes out or just what other content I upload, please smash that subscribe down button down below, preferably with the notification bell. And I will see you guys on episode, or module I should say, module 14 of the next video. Alright guys.